Hello everyone. I ended up getting a lot of messages about my Britney Spears video and where part 2 was. So this video is for those people. Britney Spears ended up releasing a book and I spent the entire week listening to the audiobook for it. And I really do feel like this is going to be a good addition to part 1 of my series, which if you haven't watched that, I definitely recommend you go watch it. I did a whole hour-and-a-half long deep dive to Britney Spears' life from her grandfather's family all the way until her conservatorship and then becoming quote-unquote free. And I know we haven't talked about all of the theories about what's going on with Britney. However, I didn't feel like it was a proper time to talk about that kind of stuff, and I really do feel like part 2 being a even deeper dive into Britney's side of the story of how things happened during her timeline of events would be better. So what we're going to be doing is going through Britney's version of events in this video. So we're going to be going through the timeline again, but even deeper. And after everything that I've learned, I truly believe that Britney Spears was living a Truman Show life mixed with the darkest, most twisted Black Mirror episode you could imagine. And it makes me sick to think that this was all happening in front of all of our eyes. And that is why I'm covering this on a true crime channel, because I always have truly felt like there was something deeper going on here. And I truly do feel like her story should be talked about in this way because it is pretty much a true crime story. We were seeing someone being held prisoner for over a decade of their life, but not in a normal way, in a way that we've never seen before. And as we all go through this again, I want you to keep in the back of your mind the question of, is Britney Spears crazy? Because to this day, despite all of this information that has come out, despite everything we know, there are still people out there that think she deserved what happened to her, including her own family and other celebrity friends. It is absolutely insane to think that these people would go on live television and speak about her being crazy, and she deserved to have everything that happened to her happened. And I think that's a whole nother level of how twisted Hollywood is, that people were saying stuff like that. And to this day, when we look at her Instagram and the way that she's still being presented in the media, she's still being shown off as crazy, and people are still thinking that there is something mentally wrong with this woman. And in my opinion, I don't think she is mentally ill to the level that people think she is. In my opinion, I think she has a lot of trauma, especially from everything that has happened to her. I do think she had postpartum depression, and there's no doubt she was depressed through all of that, but in no way do I think she is crazy. But what I want to know is your opinion. Now that you know that, let's get into this entire book and all of the information that we learned from the timeline, and there are a lot of details that are going to shock you. This is also going to be a long one, so grab yourself a little iced coffee, grab a snack, turn this video on while you're cleaning, because this is going to be long. Like, I'm probably going to be here for like 3 or 4 hours filming this, so let's get into it. As we learned in part 1, Britney's father, Jamie, was a tyrant. But in the very beginning of Britney's book, we get confirmation of this, as Britney speaks about his alcoholism and the customs that were in place back in those days that really shaped who Britney Spears is in my eyes. I think it's extremely fascinating to look at how people's upbringings really shaped them to who they are as adults. And I really do think that Britney's past affected her future. Back in those days, children were meant to be seen but not heard. And Britney grew up like that, learning that her opinion didn't matter and her parents' opinions were superior to hers. So when she finally got famous for the one thing that allowed her to tell her own stories, which was her music, that was the only way that she felt back then that she could tell her side of the story and how she was feeling and express herself. When she still wasn't allowed to control that, I could really see how that could affect a person. Britney said, and I quote, "Singing takes me to a mystical place where language doesn't matter anymore, where anything is possible. All I wanted was to be taken away from the everyday world and into the realm where I could express myself without thinking. When I was alone with my thoughts, my mind filled with worries and fears. Music stopped the noise, made me feel confident, and took me to a pure place of expressing myself exactly as I wanted to be seen and heard." End quote. Essentially, as Britney was growing up, she used music to escape the reality that she was living at home, which her home life was very troubled. And music was her safe place. Music was the place where she felt comfortable, which makes that being taken away from her in the future even more twisted. The fact that the very man she was trying to escape from through her music would take control of her music in the future is just, it's messed up. I also made a realization that Britney and her grandmother, Jean, who she also shares a name with, have a lot more in common than just their names, and the fact that the men in their lives both controlled them and also threw them both into mental institutions. We learned in Britney's book that her grandfather didn't only send Jean to a mental institution, but he also sent his second wife. And then we have the comparison between Jean and Britney, where Jean's baby ended up dying and she ended up unaliving herself over the grave of that baby years later. But Britney's children were also taken away from her, and she was not allowed to raise them. It's as if history was repeating itself. And when it comes to the story of Britney's grandfather, June, and his son, Jamie, which is Britney's father, when you compare the relationship between them and then Jamie and Britney in the future, there are a lot of parallels. It's a mirror. As I mentioned in part 1, June was not only abusive to his wives, but he was also abusive to his son. And Jamie's coach even came out and had a lot of choice words about June. But we now know that it was much worse. Britney saying, and I quote, "June made my father exercise long past exhaustion. Each day when my father finished basketball practice, no matter how tired or hungry he was, he still had to shoot 100 more baskets before he could come inside." End quote. And as history would repeat itself, Jamie would end up doing the exact same thing to Britney once he gained control of her and her fortune. He would force her to work and work and work, no matter how she felt, how tired she was, what the situation was. Even if it was Christmas, even if it was her birthday, he didn't care. And in my opinion, this is a blatant example of a cycle of abuse. Jamie's control was taken from him as a child, so he did the same thing to his daughter. He would work Britney to the bone. I also remember that in the documentary that Britney ended up doing while she was in her conservatorship called For the Record, Britney outright said how horribly angry and sad she was. And everyone just sat there and laughed at her. But she was being serious. She was telling the world how upset she was, and everyone just took it as a joke. No one cared. And honestly, I'm still shocked till this day that that documentary was allowed to even be filmed and put out to the public, especially where Britney is expressing exactly how she feels. But honestly, apparently it didn't matter because no one helped her. It didn't matter if Britney cried out for help and said exactly what was happening to her, exactly how she felt, how miserable she was, how sad she was. Britney was just labeled as crazy, and no one cared. She outright was asking for help and no one stepped in. The closest people to her, that were her friends, her literal family, didn't care. Now, a fun fact that I learned about Britney within the first 10 minutes of the book was that Britney's great-grandfather on her mother's side was actually from the island of Malta, which is really interesting to me because that's where my dad's family's from. I'm half Maltese, and I hardly ever hear anyone talk about Malta. It's a little chain of islands. There's Malta, Gozo, and Comino that are in the Mediterranean Ocean, just south of Sicily, and I think it's really cool that it's such a small, tiny place, and I think it's cool that Britney's mother, Lynne, is a quarter Maltese. But that excitement was quickly washed away because we would soon learn, which I already knew a bit about this, but the fate of her grandmother on her mother's side was no better than on her father's side. I mentioned in part 1 that Lynne's mother was named Lillian Portell, and she was from a very sophisticated family from London, England. And this family absolutely loved music. However, when she would fall in love with an American soldier, her entire life would change. Her life would go from the bustling London social scene to milking cows in the dreary south of Louisiana. And her husband would not let her go back home because he was scared that she would never come back if she did leave. So she essentially also was held captive in a way in Louisiana, where she wasn't allowed to go back home and return and see her family. She wasn't allowed to live the life that she wanted to live, and she was seemingly sad and depressed until she died. This family just has such a terrible history with its women. It's just very sad. But let's jump back to Jamie Spears in life before Britney. We spoke in part 1 how Jamie Spears was always drunk, he was always on a bender, and it seems he was self-medicating due to the abuse that his father inflicted upon him. But we now learned some new details to why Lynne actually first tried to divorce him. The first instance was when Lynne's father ended up dying, and then Jamie decided to go on a bender and missed his son Brian's first birthday. You think that Jamie would be consoling Lynne over her father dying, but no, it was all about Jamie. Jamie was on the bender, the spotlight was on Jamie. When Britney's brother Brian was a toddler, Jamie ended up getting drunk at a Christmas party, and then he went AWOL on Christmas morning. So this is when Lynne ended up packing up her and her son. She went to her mother Lillian's home, and she tried to file for divorce. And then that's when June ended up going and begging Lynne to take Jamie back. His father went and begged his wife to take him back. It's a situation for sure. If there was Facebook back then, I can't even imagine the rants that would be going on because this is just, it's a mess. It was also really sweet to learn that Britney's favorite person growing up was her great-grandmother Lexi. She would have sleepovers with her, and it just really seemed to be her safe space away from home where there was always fighting. She was always begging for her parents to stop arguing. However, when Lynne ended up deciding that Lexi was too senile to watch Britney anymore, she forbid Britney from going to spend time with her great-grandmother, sorry. We also got a peek into Britney's relationship with her brother Brian and learned that when he had his accident where he basically crushed his entire body, Britney was actually closer to him after that than they'd ever been, saying, and I quote, "I'd seen him suffer enough already," end quote. And she was meaning because Brian actually had been under a lot of pressure from their father as well to perform. He was essentially inflicting that cycle of abuse on Brian before he inflicted it on Britney. And Britney would go on to say that she ended up sleeping with her brother Brian in his bed until she was in 6th grade, which in my opinion was a little weird in a way because she was 11 years old and he was 15 years old and they were still sleeping in the same bed, which Lynne actually ended up agreeing this was getting too weird, so she ended up forbidding Britney from sleeping in there anymore and she had to go sleep in her own room. But I don't know. Let me know what you think if that's weird. I mean, they're siblings, but also a 15-year-old probably shouldn't be sleeping in bed with his 11-year-old sister every single night. But I do think that if something weird was going on with their relationship, and this was a tell-all book, I think Britney would have said something about it, but she didn't. This is where we segue into Britney's relationship with her father, Jamie. She said, and I quote, "I wanted to hide, but I also wanted to be seen. Both things could be true." End quote. Britney just wanted a father who would love her for who she was, but that is not who Jamie was going to be to her. Britney saying, and I quote, "I had no idea why he was so hard on us, why nothing we did seemed to be quite good enough for him. The saddest part to me was that what I wanted was a dad who would love me as I was. Somebody who would say, I just love you. You could do anything right now and I could still love you with unconditional love." End quote. Which is kind of what any child wants, just a parent to love them. Growing up, Britney described Jamie as being cold, reckless, and mean towards her. And when you mix this with his drinking, it was honestly better when he was off on a bender because he wasn't home then, causing trouble and being mean to Lynne and their children. Britney saying that when he was home, her father and mother would constantly be arguing, they'd be up all night. And because he was so blackout drunk all the time when he was in these arguments, he wouldn't even remember the next day that they had argued or anything that had happened. But Lynne would continue to argue with him every single time, despite it essentially being useless. And I think this really started to build resentment between Britney and Lynne, but their relationship would get better as Britney grew up. It seemed that by night, their home was a nightmare. During the day, their home was always bustling with Lynne's friends and the neighborhood kids, and they put out this persona that nothing was wrong in the world. And it's one of those situations where you really don't know what goes on behind closed doors. When Britney was 9 years old, her little sister, Jamie Lynn, was born. But after Lynne came home from the hospital, she actually ended up hemorrhaging, and Britney was a witness to this, and she's seen all of the blood, and she said it really traumatized her. And this actually ended up causing Britney to panic anytime she wasn't in eyesight of her mother because she thought her mother was gonna die. She detailed that one time when she was in gymnastics class, she looked up to see where her mother was, and her mother wasn't there anymore. And it turned out Lynne had just gone down the street to go to Walmart while Britney was at gymnastics class, and this really sent Britney into a panic thinking her mother had died. You know, she was crying, she thought something happened to her, and so after that, Lynne never left Britney's side again. And I think this really cemented in Britney that she had no control over her family, but she would have control over her career. Now let's hop to after Britney went to New York City to do the Star Search, and then after that she went back home to Kenwood. It was really cute to hear a lot about Britney's school experience because I honestly didn't know a lot of this at all. It was really cute to learn that Britney actually was super in love with playing basketball when she was in school, and she pointed out how everyone thought she was going to be a cheerleader because she was this cute little girl, but no, she was not the cheerleader type. She loved her sports, and she would also have a crush on an older basketball player at school at that time. Britney would eventually become part of the Mickey Mouse Club, and as far as everything we learned, she had an amazing experience doing that. She would end up sharing a dressing room with Christina Aguilera and Nikki DeLoach, and since she was younger, she looked up to some of the older kids like Carrie Russell, Ryan Gosling, and Tony Lucca. And what's really funny, considering who she would end up being with, she actually had a crush first on Tony Lucca. She thought he was incredibly handsome at the time. From everything that I ended up learning, she really always seemed to go for older guys. Not every single time, but quite often. I don't know if that's something to do with daddy issues. I'm not even going to dive into that. But as we know, this is where Britney would first meet Justin Timberlake. During the early days of shooting, Britney's grandmother Lillian would end up dying. And the Spears family at that time didn't have any money to fly everyone back home to go to the funeral. So Justin Timberlake's mother, who was also named Lynne surprisingly, ended up lending the family money so that they could all fly back home to Louisiana and attend the funeral. It was really sweet. It was really kind. Now, Justin Timberlake and Britney Spears' first kiss would actually be at a sleepover where they were playing Truth and Dare. And someone ended up daring Justin to kiss her. And while they had this kiss, it said that a Janet Jackson song was playing. But Britney Spears' preteen and early teen years were, in my opinion, they're quite controversial. I don't know if it was just because back in those days in the 90s, things were different, but the things that she described really raised red flags for me. By 13 years old, Britney was often drinking with her mother Lynne, which she described as a positive experience. And she was also smoking cigarettes with her friends by 13, which honestly, I can't even imagine a 13-year-old drinking and smoking. They're just so little. They're so young still. At 13 years old, Britney was also driving in Louisiana, which honestly, I've heard stories from my family as well that lived up in the country and they were driving that young as well. Like, it's just different, I guess, when you live in a rural area compared to the city. But we did talk in part one about how Britney ended up crashing the car when she was driving it, but we didn't know the reason behind it. But the reason behind this crash was actually because Lynne ended up smelling cigarette smoke on Britney, so she grabbed her hand to smell it, and Britney ended up veering off the road when this happened, and that's why they crashed. Another time, Britney also got caught smoking with some friends at school and got sent to the principal's office. Now let's get into the situation of 13-year-old Britney Spears with her friend's older sister's 18-year-old boyfriend. You heard that right. Because this one really dropped my jaw when she recounted this as a positive experience because, in my opinion, and according to the law as far as I read, an 18-year-old with a 13-year-old is statutory RAPE. But according to Britney, her friend's older sister and her boyfriend were the school's it couple. But Britney just always wished that this boy would look at her. Again, back to this always being obsessed with older guys. Britney said that one night she slept over at this friend's house, and during the night she woke up to this 18-year-old man, we can call it that, sitting on the couch next to her. She said that this 18-year-old started kissing her and that turned into making out. So that just dropped my jaw that this 13-year-old girl is sleeping over at her friend's house. She wakes up, an 18-year-old is sitting next to her and starts making out with her. But she said it didn't go any farther than that. But that is just still, it's still icky in my opinion. She recounts it as a positive experience, but I really wonder how she would feel if she had a 13-year-old daughter and an 18-year-old was making out with that child in the middle of the night. It's weird to me. She also mentioned that she liked to look at her brother's friends a lot, and keep in mind she would be around 13 or 14 years old and her brother's friends would be about 17, 18 years old, which I'm not saying that is a 13-year-old's fault for doing any of this. It would be on the adult to tell the child no if there is something going on there. It's just not an appropriate situation, no matter which way you look at that. However, when Britney was 14 years old, she would end up losing her virginity to her brother's 17-year-old friend. And according to a legal website, it says, and I quote, "All U.S. states set their ages of consent limits between 16 and 18. Under the law, anyone who has sexual contact with someone under the age of 16 could be charged with corruption of minors," end quote. So even that situation, her losing her virginity to a 17-year-old when she was 14, it's just still all levels of icky to me. And when she started getting involved with her brother's friend, she ended up missing 17 days of school. And this is because she spent a lot of her time sneaking out with him and spending time with him, and she just wasn't interested in anything but him at this point. And she even admitted that the age gap was just too big between them. And once Brian ended up finding out that his friend was hooking up with his little sister, he ended up not liking this friend anymore, which good for Brian for that. And he actually ended up telling his parents about the situation too. But not long after this, Britney would end up going back to singing and would leave her small town life behind. I talked a lot in part one about how Britney Spears was sexualized a lot as a teenager, but there was a lot more that I didn't know and I didn't mention. Like, let's talk about this Rolling Stones cover from 1999, where a man named David LaChapelle thought it would be appropriate to take photos of a then 16-year-old Britney Spears laying in bed in her underwear holding a Teletubby, captioning it, and I quote, "inside the mind and bedroom of a teen dream," end quote. There would be other photos taken of her in a bra in her bedroom in very adult poses, in small amounts of clothing, selling hot dogs with a truck driver peering at her behind her. And looking back, these photos have rubbed a lot of people the wrong ways, including myself. It really makes me question what David LaChapelle does in his alone time. The entire thing is just inappropriate, in my opinion. It's just highly inappropriate, and it's really bridging, you know, illegal, in my opinion, too. Like, where is the line between this being CP and this not being CP? The amount that Britney has been sexualized is just shocking when you really look into it. It's just so shocking. And the men that okayed this and that thought this was appropriate, maybe they need to be looked into. This is where we say that's just Hollywood. And if we also remember, Britney got a lot of hate for these images that adults took of her and posted and put in magazines. The child was getting hate for them. The media was asking about her breasts. Parents were saying that she was a bad influence to children. She would go and do performances, and grown men would show up to these shows and sit there and leer at her the entire show. But all Britney wanted to do was sing and dance. And you think she would be the happiest person in the world living her dream. But this is also the time when she started taking antidepressants. An honorable mention around this time was a photo that Britney took with Mariah Carey that she mentioned in her book that I ended up finding on Mariah's Twitter. Britney also mentioned running into Madonna a lot while she was touring around this time. We also learned that Britney dove so deep into method acting when she did her first movie, Crossroads, which I will say was like my favorite movie as a kid. I have such vivid memories of that movie. I kind of want to watch it again. And honestly, I really do feel like Britney Spears was an amazing actress. She could have been an amazing actress. But she said that she dove so deep into method acting to play this character that she said it actually really scared her and affected her because she couldn't get out of that character for months. She was like stuck in this mode of being that character even outside of filming. But I just think that no one properly trained her how to method act and how to separate, you know, being that character and being yourself. But it scared her so much that she actually didn't really want to ever act again. She ended up actually auditioning for The Notebook, which that's newsly. I feel like Britney should have just stopped singing at this point and started acting, and I really do think her life might have been different in a way. And I think she would have been absolutely amazing, and I think it would have been easier on her in a way, because singing and everything that would happen after that was really hard on her. And I think it is hard. Acting's hard for sure, but doing these tours and dancing constantly is even harder on your body, I think. Her crying on cue and just doing that audition, it honestly really convinced me of that scene, and I thought I was watching the movie and I got lost in it. When it ended, I was like, oh, now I wanna see The Notebook starring Britney Spears. You know, maybe in another life, Britney would have been an actress instead. But instead, Britney would go on to turn down 3 to 4 more movie roles, and she even declined doing Chicago, which she says that she deeply regrets this day. At 19 years old, Britney was touring by day, and by night, she was skinny dipping in the ocean all night with her dancers and just talking with them until the early hours of the morning. She was literally living her dream at this point, and she said that her favorite tour was her Dream Within a Dream tour. This point of Britney's life, if her life had just continued to go how that point in her life had went, her life would have been a dream. But it turned into a nightmare instead. So let's jump back to Justin Timberlake and Britney's relationship. The two had ended up staying in contact after the Mickey Mouse Club, and when Britney started touring, she actually ended up touring a lot with NSYNC, which was the group that Justin Timberlake was in. And even after they finished touring together, the two of them would spend a lot of time together before shows. And before long, Britney realized she was starting to fall in love with Justin. The two of them were said to be like magnets. They couldn't get enough of each other. They would end up having a home together in Orlando where they would live together, and the two of them would go off and tour, and Orlando would be their home base where they would meet up and spend, 2 weeks to 2 months together at a time. However, according to Britney, she knew that Justin had cheated on her a few times at this point, but she forgave him every time because she loved him. One of these times was when NSYNC was touring in London, and paparazzi would end up capturing Justin inside of a vehicle with a singer from the band All Saints. And I really don't think that Britney is lying about Justin cheating on her, because according to this 2000s article, and I quote, All Saints Nicole Appleton turned all shy when she was spotted in a night out with Justin Timberlake of US boy band NSYNC. Nicole, whose group has shot straight into the charts at NO1 with Pure Shores, certainly looks like she had something to hide when she returned to Justin's hotel in London. She and Justin, 19, kept their eyes down as they were driving together from London's Mayfair Club to the swanky St. Martin's Lane Hotel. Since being dumped by fiancé Robbie Williams, 25-year-old Nicole has gone from one relationship to another. She dated bushrocker Gavin Rossdale until December before she was linked to Hornblower actor Ion Gufford, and Justin has been dating American temptress Britney Spears, end quote. American temptress. The wording that they would always use for Britney was always so derogatory. They didn't call this other woman a temptress when she was jumping around from man to man and now seemingly cheating with Justin on Britney. But Britney is called the American temptress. It's just so weird. They would just always call Britney such awful things. And keep in mind, when Justin was cheating on her when he was off in London, England, they had been dating for about a year at this point. And given they'd also known each other since they were kids. Another time when they were in Vegas, one of Britney's dancers ended up telling her that when they were hanging out with Justin, that he had motioned towards this girl who was actually also famous and now has children, and said, and I quote, "Yeah, man, I hit that last night," end quote. Britney said there was also rumors of Justin hooking up with various other dancers and groupies, but she said she let it go every single time because she loved him. And the fact that this man-child was sleeping around with all these people when he had Britney fucking Spears at home, who anyone would sell their left kidney at that point in time to date Britney Spears. It's just, honestly, it's wild to me. But honestly, I'm not shocked. It happens more than you'd want to know with famous people and non-famous people. Just the amount of cheating I've seen just in the social media industry is just, the fact that there's people out there who take having an actual relationship with someone for granted when there's people out there who would beg and die for a relationship like that. It's just, it's sad. It's sad the way that people treat each other. So if you remember in part 1, Justin would turn into this total dick saying that Britney Spears cheated on him in his song. He exposed her virginity status on a radio station despite her management trying to put out this squeaky clean facade about her that she was going to be a virgin until marriage, which Britney Spears turned around and ended up saying that she did not care that Justin did this, which I think it was still a dick way of doing it, but she said she actually was happy he did it because she didn't want to lie. And she thought it was weird that she was an adult having to say that she was a virgin when she hadn't been for, 8 years or something. Well, as you heard, according to Britney and literal articles from back then, Justin was actually cheating on her the whole time, not the other way around, despite him later making an entire music video about her cheating on him. Now, Britney said that after all of this time of Justin cheating on her with all these multiple different women, she finally had enough, and she basically wanted to feel some self-worth, I guess, because Justin wasn't showing it to her. And after all this, Britney says that she ended up cheating on Justin with this guy named Wade Robson, who was a dancer and choreographer. She said they went dancing at a Spanish bar and made out. I didn't see her say anything about them sleeping together. She just said that they made out, but she says that she ended up telling Justin that she did this, but they still stay together. Now here's where things got shocking, because Britney would end up getting pregnant with Justin's baby. It was an accident, but as we all know, Britney grew up in Louisiana, where, you know, abortion usually is a no-no there, and she also just always really wanted to be a mother. She was very maternal. It was in every part of Britney's being that she wanted to be a mother, and we talked about it a lot in part 1, how her kids being taken away from her destroyed her. But before her 2 sons, she was pregnant with Justin's baby, and you think that would be an amazing thing. She loved Justin to the moon and back, and clearly it was unconditional, because it didn't matter what he did to her, their relationship was still going to be strong, apparently. And she truly did want to marry Justin. She wanted to have his kids. She wanted to grow old with Justin. This was a happy thing for her, that she got pregnant with his baby. However, Justin's feelings were not mutual. He was not happy that Britney was pregnant. He said that they were too young and it wasn't the right time in their life for this, which, how much more ready could you be, seeing that they were both adults, they both were rich at this point. It's not like they were teenagers who didn't have enough money to put a roof over their own heads or buy groceries that week, and so it wouldn't be responsible for them to bring a baby into the world that they couldn't afford. In my opinion, Justin didn't want to have a baby at that point because he wanted to go out and party and drink and sleep around. He didn't want to be tied down. He didn't want this baby to cramp his pop star gangster life he was trying to live at that point. So Britney said, and I quote, "If he didn't want to become a father, I didn't feel like I had much of a choice. I didn't want to push him into something he didn't want. Our relationship was too important to me." End quote. So Britney loved Justin so much that she would end up getting an abortion for him. But not only an abortion, but an at-home abortion. Now, I am not against abortions. That's not what I'm saying. It's the fact that he forced her to do this despite her not wanting it. And then they did it in such an unsafe way. They did it without any medical help, and they did this so that no one else would find out about it. The only people that were there that night were Justin, Britney, and her assistant Felicia. Britney said that she wanted to go to the hospital. She thought she was dying at one point, and they would not let her. The level of messed up that is astronomical. This poor woman. So not only did she stay with Justin and love him after he was sleeping around on her, she let him convince her to abort their child and then risk her life doing so. And then he turns around and breaks up with her, makes a music video about her cheating on him, and goes on radio shows talking about her virginity status. It's just flabbergasting to me, and it makes me angry for her. It would make me angry if that happened to one of my friends or my sister or my brother, even if you flip it around. Like my brother's, like if that happened to anyone I knew and loved, I would be so pissed. The shit that was going on behind the scenes to her. Meanwhile, the tabloids were out there calling her a slut and slut shaming her and saying shit about her every single day that was so derogatory and rude and mean. It's just so crazy the way that Hollywood works. And you see that with social media nowadays too. We never know what is fully happening behind the scenes, but there's always rumors and they're always twisted, and it's just crazy. We see that a lot with gossip sites. Like I know there's one called Gossip Guru, where people go on there and they'll just talk shit about social media influencers and stuff just for fun. And that's honestly what the tabloids were doing back in the day. They were just making up stories and just talking, and it's just crazy that people spend that much time talking about people like that, but especially spending so much time talking negatively about people. Meanwhile, stuff like this is happening behind the scenes. I just can't imagine it. But meanwhile, while Britney is going through all of this, she's going through the loss of her unborn child that she seemingly didn't want to lose. During all of this, Justin is actually working on his first solo album. And this is when Britney said that Justin started to act differently. He started to act kind of standoffish towards her. Despite everything that happened, Britney was still fawning over Justin. She was so much in love with him still. He was her home. To her, he was like family at this point because her own family was such a train wreck. Justin was her safe space. But meanwhile, Justin was writing an album about her in the worst way. He then broke up with her over text while she was on set. And Justin breaking up with Britney destroyed her in many ways, which we then seen documented in the media. And it really sent her into this spiral of depression because she wouldn't speak about Justin for months, and even the thought of speaking his name made her want to cry. And she said that she felt clinically in shock. And I'm going to be raw with you all, because when I heard her talking about this and how she felt, I have actually been in a relationship where something similar like this happened, and I felt the same way. And I never knew how to voice that feeling. But her saying that she felt clinically in shock really summed it up for me. I loved that boy to the moon, and he could have done every single thing that Justin did, and I would have taken him back in a heartbeat, just like Britney did. He did honestly just as much bad, but in his own way to me, and it destroyed me for a long time. And like Britney, that time of my life was also documented too. I was a live streamer at that time. I was actually filming a series at that time in LA with a bunch of other social media kids. So I, in my own way, can understand exactly how Britney was feeling during that time. And I would not wish that on my worst enemy. I really wouldn't. It's an experience that could absolutely destroy someone when you're that head over heels for someone and then they do something so horrible to you and they leave you and just don't give a shit. It's just bad. It's really bad. I don't know how else to put it. And so Britney went back to Kentwood and she didn't leave her home. She didn't talk to anyone. She just laid in her bed and she stared at the ceiling. Britney's saying, and I quote, "Everyone that knew me thought something was wrong with me. Really wrong," end quote. And I get that. There was people that thought there was something wrong with me too. During that time, for whatever reason, Justin decided to fly to Louisiana after everything he did to her. And he went there to visit her. I'm assuming because he heard about how bad of a situation she was in and he felt obligated to go see her. But he also ended up giving Britney a letter that he wrote and framed, which I thought was weird that he framed it. But Britney didn't want to read the letter, but she did say that the letter ended off by saying, and I quote, "I can't breathe without you," end quote. But it's like, if you can't breathe without her and you apparently loved her enough to write her this letter and blah, 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 why did you treat her like that? Well, why were you such a douchebag? Like, damn. But, you know, Britney seeing Justin didn't fix her. It didn't fix how she felt. She was still essentially fucked up after what he did to her. And I can honestly say I had the same experience because I ended up seeing the boy in my situation as well after a bit of time, and it did not fix me either. It just made things worse. Now keep in mind that Britney is still reeling from what just happened to her, but she still had to perform because she still had tour dates left. So after she went and did that, she wanted to take some time for herself to work on her mental health and to take a step away from everything because she was in such a bad mental place, but her team wasn't for that. Because at this point in time, Britney was a cog in the Hollywood machine. To them, she wasn't a person, she was just a dollar sign. She said, and I quote, "As I'd quickly figure out, you really can't go home again," end quote. Now let's talk a little bit about Jamie Lynn at this point in time, because I can make a whole video about Jamie Lynn, that's for sure. Jamie Lynn's upbringing was a lot different than Britney's because Britney and her brother Brian grew up poor and Jamie Lynn grew up with money because of Britney becoming famous. Britney would describe Jamie Lynn's upbringing like Ariana Grande's song 7 Rings because Jamie Lynn got what she wanted whenever she wanted. She was essentially a spoiled brat. And Britney even went as far to say that Jamie was a total bitch. And if you've ever heard Jamie Lynn's ex-castmate Alexa Nicholas talk about her and her experience with Jamie Lynn on set when they were kids, it's true. She was a terror. And as much as I don't like her, which was honestly very tragic for me to hear that all of this because I actually loved her show growing up. Can you really blame Jamie Lynn for how she turned out considering how spoiled she was and how she grew up being spoiled? Not really. Britney said that when she'd go back to Kentwood, Jamie Lynn would be glued to the TV screen. Lynn would cater to anything Jamie Lynn would ask. She'd bring her chocolate milkshakes. Jamie Lynn would spew, as Britney would say, hateful words at their mother, and Lynn wouldn't bat an eye. She wouldn't raise her voice. She wouldn't care. And at this time, it was said that Lynn was self-medicating because of her divorce with Jamie. At this point, she had divorced Jamie. And it was one of those situations where it was really eye-opening to Britney because, and I think we see this a lot with younger and older siblings. If Britney had even talked back to her parents when she was little, she probably would have gotten smacked because back then kids would get a beating if, you know, they were disrespectful to their elders. But then we have little Jamie Lynn here who is just sitting on the couch watching TV, yelling at her mother to bring her food because she's hungry and snacks and just being absolutely disrespectful. And she doesn't even get, you know, an eye batted at her. She's getting catered to. So I can see how resentment would start to build up from there, especially because Britney was funding her entire family's lifestyles. She bought the house they were in. She bought the TV that Jamie Lynn was watching TV on and being disrespectful to everyone around. You know, Jamie Lynn had no respect for things. She didn't have an even concept, you know, that her sister had bought all of the stuff for them and that they could be living, you know, in a little trailer home, you know, like they had when they were growing up. And she had no concept of that. She was born into, you know, having money. You know, it was at this point when Britney went back to Kentwood and seen all of this that she realized that her life had changed so drastically. And she realized that she had no one that she could confide in her own family back there either, which I'm sure felt even lonelier that, you know, You couldn't even confide in your own family about how you were feeling. You just went through this traumatizing relationship experience. You were forced to abort your baby in a very traumatizing way. Despite having all of this money and all of this fame and, all of these celebrity friends, it really felt like Britney had no one. In 2002, Britney would end up flying to Italy and she would be drinking wine and hanging out with Donatella Versace. Now keep in mind the fact that Britney did have a relationship, it seems, with Donatella Versace, who was also way older than her, because people were really questioning Britney's wedding to Sam, who we'll talk about a lot later, because Donatella was at this wedding. There were a lot of people at this wedding where people were like, why were they there? Well, apparently Britney had a relationship with Donatella. Maybe we'll talk about it in part 3. All of these theories and conspiracies and stuff. But Britney would end up returning to the US after having this fun in Italy. And this is when Justin would end up releasing his music video for Cry Me a River. And everyone would begin hating Britney for breaking the heart of America's golden boy. Britney saying, and I quote, "The truth, I was comatose in Louisiana and he was happily running around Hollywood." End quote. But this meant that Justin now had all the power. In 2003, Britney would end up having a brief brawl, as she put it, with actor Colin Farrell. She ended up catching eyes for him, and then she ended up initiating their relationship when she drove up to a movie set he was filming on and ended up walking her way onto the soundstage, which I will say, if anything, Britney Spears had fucking balls back then. The director ended up recognizing her, obviously, and ended up letting her stay there and watch while they were filming, and then Colin ended up coming over and chatting with her. And from there, they were head over heels for each other for 2 weeks. He even ended up taking her to the premiere of his movie, The Recruit. Meanwhile, Justin Timberlake and Christina Aguilera would end up being put on the Rolling Stones cover together, where Christina would end up saying that Britney and Justin should get back together. Like, how weird and confusing is that? That one of your friends that you've also known since childhood is on this cover knowing that you two just broke up and probably knows a lot of the details about it, let's be honest. And this friend of yours is saying that you two should get back together after how much she traumatized you and literally just came out and said that you cheated on him. Like, it's so weird. Meanwhile, while Justin is running around LA, sleeping around and partying and, living his best life because he just put out this album that went viral, Britney was isolating herself in her New York apartment. She said she wasn't talking to anyone and she was eating takeout for every meal. She was just having this depressive episode. And she said that at this point in time, the only person who would really come over and see her was Madonna. And she said that Madonna at this point in time of her life was like a mentor to her. It seemed that Madonna really helped Britney get out of this funk she was in, this depression she was in, and really made her feel some self-worth for herself, which has led to the big VMA moment where Britney and Madonna ended up kissing. And back then, 2 women kissing on stage was a big thing. And it was even bigger that Justin Timberlake was watching from the crowd, which I think is a good little fuck you to him.
You know what? This is seriously something I've dreamt about since I was a little girl. I cannot believe this just freaking happened. I'm on a very major high right now. I feel very cool. So no, seriously, it was amazing. It was awesome. I feel very blessed. And it was
the opening act. Everybody's going to be talking about that.
It was cool. It was very glossy. I very much enjoyed Coldplay though.
Now let's talk about Jamie weaseling his way back into his daughter's life, because during all of this time, he wasn't really around much. According to Britney, in 2004, when her 4th studio album, In the Zone, came out, MTV ended up taking her around the city to 3 nightclubs to promote her album. Not long after this, 4 men would come knocking on her door, one of them being her father. Now, she was actually very cryptic about this conversation. All she said was that they kind of barged into her house, sat her down, and began questioning her, but she didn't want to answer any of their questions. But after this, her team would end up forcing her to talk to Diane Sawyer, which we all know that interview is a horrible interview. Diane Sawyer made her cry. She was asking the most awful questions to this young woman who just went through something so tragic that we didn't even know about.
You've had a rough year. You've had a year that would test a lot of people. Illness in the family, a breakup, this spasm of publicity about what happened from Mexico to London.
It was pretty rough, yeah. Yeah, it's kind of weird. Ah, weird. Hello. Oh my goodness, hello. Ew, strong Britney. Yeah, it was a weird time. Ew, I'm embarrassed, can we stop this?
And Britney said that this interview made her feel extremely humiliated, and it honestly made her not really want to do interviews anymore. After what Justin had done to her, he traumatized her, he quote unquote outed her to the world and made everyone hate her essentially and just talk even more shit about her. You know, she'd just been depressed for all of these months and she still wasn't better. She still wasn't mentally there because her team kept forcing her to do shows and make albums and do all this stuff. She never had the time to just sit there and, you know, go to therapy and do things that, you know, nowadays everyone is very, you know, for. You know, the media just continuously traumatized her. Her friends and, you know, the people that she thought were the most important people in her life traumatized her. Her family didn't care about how she felt. It has to be horrible. She very boldly said in her book that she felt like at this point in her life, in her early 20s, she should have been learning about herself and growing internally and not forced to share that with the world. And I think that's a bigger conversation. A lot of people have that conversation nowadays about people showing their children on social media. So the camera died, but we are back. And as I was saying, I don't think people realize when you start your career as a child star or when you're younger, you don't think about the consequences that it'll have in the future, such as your relationships being private. And I think we've seen this in the mid to late 2000s after Britney with Taylor Swift. She started as a young star as well, and as soon as she started dating, everyone and their mothers wanted to know every detail about her relationships, about her dating life, what she was doing, when she was doing it with them, who broke up with who, and it was just this endless cycle of people asking questions and speculating and essentially tearing her apart for dating. And we've seen the same thing happen with Britney back then. Britney never got time to grieve and heal from the trauma that she experienced ever. And unlike the rest of us who aren't public spectacles like these celebrities are, and now we see with influencers, Britney would be forced to do these interviews and then have to share every single grueling detail that she didn't want to share. And she essentially was doing this against her will because her management and her team were forcing her to. So it was just one thing after another. Nobody cared how Britney felt. And Britney marked this interview as a turning point where she began to not see herself as someone that she recognized anymore. As soon as Britney wasn't working and she had free time, she ended up flying to Vegas. She partied with Paris Hilton and danced on tables drunk. It was all fun and games, and this is also when she began having a little fling with her old childhood friend, Jason Alexander, who we all know she ended up marrying in Vegas at 3 a.m. And she stated that they weren't in love, she was just drunk and bored. However, the next day, as we again all know, Britney was in big trouble. And she didn't understand why her family and her team were so upset that she had this, you know, random Vegas wedding. Family and team ended up flying to Vegas. They ended up forcing her to annul the marriage. And Britney said for the rest of her time in Vegas there, she was crying the whole time. Keep in mind, Britney was a full-grown adult at this point. So why was it her family's decision if she got married or not? Because it shouldn't have been. But they wanted to control Britney. They always had to control her. They never seen her as good enough to make her own decisions. And a lot of people would say that, you know, they made the choice to be famous. If they didn't want their whole lives on display, then they shouldn't have become famous. That they essentially asked for this. But we have to keep in mind that Britney was a child when she became famous. There was no way that she was going to be thinking ahead that far when she was like 12 years old about her privacy and her love life and how that would affect her as an adult. You know, everything being out in the media and everyone knowing every detail and everyone else making decisions for her when those are decisions that she should be able to make for herself in the privacy of her own home. You don't think at 12 years old how becoming a mega pop star is going to strip you of your privacy. You just think it's going to be fun. You're going to make money. You don't think about your feelings and choices being stripped from you. You don't even know that those exist at that point in time. And I think that's a really big problem with becoming famous at a young age. And at this point, Britney was funding her entire family's lifestyles. And it was when her brother began working for her that their relationship began going downhill. She went on another tour and she hated it. And she, at this point, just wanted to settle down and have a family. And that's when she would end up running into Kevin Federline at Joseph's Cafe in Hollywood. He started as a very steady, strong comfort to her that went beyond just lust. And there was a lot of talk at this time about Britney stealing someone else's man, but according to Britney, she had no clue that at the time when she met Kevin, that he had a toddler with his ex-girlfriend, and his ex-girlfriend was also 8 months pregnant with their second child. But of course, everyone blamed Britney for, you know, being a homewrecker or whatever. I don't know why people do this, but they were all hating on her, and we see this happen not just with celebrities, with everyday life as well, when they should have been hating on the man in this situation, aka Kevin, who is literally leaving his pregnant ex-girlfriend and their child to go be with someone else. But no, It was Britney's fault. After just 3 months of dating, Britney ended up proposing to Kevin on a flight home from tour. But he ended up telling her no and then turned it around and proposed to her. During this tour, Britney would end up hurting her knee again and she'd ended up being put on Vicodin, and around this time is also when Jamie Lynn started filming for her show, Zoe 101. On September 18th, 2004, Britney and Kevin would end up getting married, but because the prenup was taking so long, they legally wouldn't be married until October 6th. All the girls ended up wearing pink Juicy Couture sweatsuits, which honestly I think is really cute. These were the boys, which I don't think the boys' outfits were as nice, but that's just my opinion. But as you see, Britney has this type of either dating older guys or these bad boys. But around this time, Britney was honestly starting to feel happy again, and she wanted to start creating a future with Kevin, the future, you know, that she so desperately was looking for all these years. And this was around the time that Britney started feeling, I think, more confident in saying no to things that didn't feel good to her, whether that be tours or her managers or making public appearances or doing interviews. She was saying no to a lot of things at this point because in my opinion, she did love music and she loved the creative side of dancing and music, but she didn't love being famous. She didn't love having to constantly be on camera and telling people her secrets and crying and just the whole like emotional toll it was taking. And she just wanted to settle down and have a family. She just wanted to be a normal girl at this point. Keep in mind, she's in her early 20s only. She was still so young. Now let's get into Britney's pregnancy years. She said that while she was pregnant, she was a complete mama bear and all she wanted was food and sex. She said she was, and I quote, America's sweetheart and the meanest woman alive, end quote. And this is also around the time when a very hormonal and pregnant Britney would go on the set of Zoe 101 and end up yelling at a then 12-year-old Alexa, which she has apologized for to Alexa as far as I know, and Alexa has said that in her interviews that she's done. From there, Britney's first son, Sean, would be born, and then 3 months after that, she would end up getting pregnant with her second child. And the paparazzi around this time was from hell. We spoke a lot about the paparazzi in part 1 and how terrible they were and how horrible and how invasive and honestly abusive in my opinion they were. Not only to Britney, but just celebrities in general back then. No matter what Britney did or where she went, she had 100 cameras shoved in her face. The paparazzi would get into car chases for photos. They'd corner her in restaurants when she was 24 years old alone because she ran into a restaurant to get away from all of these strange men with their cameras who were harassing her and threatening her. So she was terrified and she ran into a restaurant with her baby and she's crying because she's so scared and upset. But of course the media would twist that to this and that when really she's just 24 years old and she's, you know, stressed. I would be too if I was walking around with my baby and all these strangers just started coming at you trying to video you and take photos. And they wouldn't even do it nicely. They were extremely aggressive at all times, it seemed like. Again, it's extremely dangerous. They were getting into car chases for photos. And honestly, I can't imagine that happening in today's day and age with, say, like TikTok stars that are, you know, huge and famous. The paparazzi chasing them like that, people would rip them apart for endangering the life of their favorite celebrity. But back then, people applauded these paparazzi for getting the shot. And it wasn't just photos of Britney. They would critique every little bit about this young woman. They'd critique her weight, if she wore makeup that day, how she was dressed. And I can't imagine being postpartum and then also pregnant 3 months later. I can't imagine the stress and the emotional toll that would do to someone. But again, no one cared about Britney's feelings. It was always about the bottom line. Then we get into the downfall of Britney and Kevin's marriage, which their relationship is something that I didn't know much about at all when I did my first video. And now I feel like I've learned so much more and just how terrible of a person this man is as well. Around this time, Kevin began working on his own music. So he was out of the house for long periods of time in the studio, working on his music, getting high with his buddies.
The single is Popozão. This is a Brazilian ass shaker right here. Can I say that? Right.
So of course their relationship began to get more and more strained. But as Britney seemed to do in every relationship she tried to justify it to herself that this is just how marriage was, that you had to be supportive of the person and that, you know, you had to push through the heart. Meanwhile, people, and I think it was the media as well, was telling Britney that Kevin was going to do exactly to her what he had done to his ex-girlfriend and their kids. And little did Britney know history was going to once again repeat itself. Kevin's career and star power began to take off and he started to go out a lot more, go to parties that had people in attendance such as Justin Timberlake, which then he would seemingly brag about to Britney, which in my opinion is just so out of pocket to brag to your wife about hanging out with her ex-boyfriend who literally traumatized her and hurt her so badly. Like, it's just so messed up. Like, in what world do you brag about hanging out with your partner's ex? It's just so messed up. But, you know, Britney just took it. At one point, Britney ended up flying out to New York City to see Kevin because she hadn't seen him in a while. But when she ended up arriving, he nor his manager, who used to be part of Britney's team, so she knew him, wanted to see her. They refused to let Britney see Kevin. Britney saying, and I quote, "Kevin was just so enthralled with the fame and the power. Again in my life, I've seen fame and money ruin people. And I saw it happen to Kevin in slow motion." End quote. Despite this, Britney knowing deep down inside that her marriage to Kevin was probably over, Britney still wanted to believe that it could be fixed. Kevin ended up moving his studio to Las Vegas after this. He shaved his head. He thought he was going to become this big badass rapper. And as Britney did, she followed him there. Again, she wasn't allowed to speak to him, and his security team, which once again was part of her security team, told her no, that she couldn't see him. Which I can't even imagine going to see my husband and being told he doesn't want to see me and that I can't go in. Like, what? Now, allegedly, Kevin says that he didn't say this and that he never said he didn't want to see her, but what happened happened. And honestly, I don't believe a word that comes out of that man's fucking mouth. I don't believe a word that comes out of the mouths of any of them that put Britney in the conservatorship. During all of this, Jaden ended up being born. And now, despite Britney starting to feel more herself, now that she wasn't pregnant anymore, her hormones are starting to regulate a little bit more. She now had 2 babies to protect, seemingly on her own, and she's dealing with even more emotional turmoil with everything going on with her relationship with Kevin. And at this point, she decided she wanted to start hiding her kids from the world. Now, in this day and age, in 2023, people would praise a mother for doing this, for protecting them from the media and the paparazzi. But back then, it just made people more upset. It made people ask questions and get more desperate for information and think that there was something wrong and that Britney was doing something that was so out of bounds, denying the world from seeing her children. And you can just see it from the magazine article covers that I seen. All you have to do is a quick Google and you see ones like this cover that says, "What's wrong with Brit's baby? Baby Jaden hidden for 8 months." They were just endless covers of there had to be something wrong if Britney wasn't showing the world her children. And again, this is where Britney would begin to start acting differently, which after all she'd been through, I am not surprised. And we talked a lot in part 1 about the idea of Britney having postpartum depression, especially having one child after another with all the stress she was under, all of her past traumas that were never resolved. Her husband was basically just ghosting her and breaking up with her without even saying it. Meanwhile, the paparazzi is hounding her every move and the media is just talking trash about her from every angle. All of that combined, anyone would have a breakdown. Britney saying, and I quote, "It was my dream to have children and raise them in the coziest environment I could create. To me, they were perfect, beautiful, everything I wanted." End quote. And it seems like this whole idea of postpartum depression was true. Britney would end up mentioning that she was extremely overprotective of Jaden and she wouldn't even let Lynne, her mother, hold him, or at least the first 2 months of his life. And then when she did let her mother hold him, it was only for a few minutes at a time. And she admits that she was too overprotective. And she says that once she had her children, she sort of had this like mental regression. But again, honestly, I don't blame her for reacting the way she did or having any issues considering her past. In the end, after I'm assuming going to therapy and looking back at her past, she now has realized that she did have what is called perinatal depression, which is depression that occurs during or after a pregnancy. And I'm pretty sure it's very similar to postpartum depression if it's not the same thing. But it includes symptoms such as a lack of joy in life, a sense of emotional numbness or feeling trapped, withdrawal from family and friends, excessive concern for your baby, a strong sense of failure and inadequacy, severe mood swings, high expectations, and an overly demanding attitude and difficulty making sense of things, all of which Britney was displaying at the time, all of which no one noticed because, again, no one gave a flying F about Britney's feelings or how she was actually doing. And if just one person had actually opened their damn eyes and gave a shit, it seems, maybe she could have gotten some help. Maybe she could have gone and done some therapy. She could have taken a step back for a few months from the scene and actually, you know, had time to regulate her feelings and what was happening. You know, she just had kids. Her husband's leaving her. This is a lot on top of everything else. But no one cared. And it was, again, just one thing after another after another. Meanwhile, as Britney's mental health was deteriorating, Kevin was living his best life trying to become this famous rapper. He got an opportunity to do a Super Bowl commercial, and after this, Britney never really seen him again. Which honestly, how often was she really seeing him at this point anyways? She said, and I quote, "It was like he was too good to even talk to me." end quote. Again, another man in her life who she is not good enough for. It's crazy to me. Not her father, not Justin, now her husband. It's just, I don't get it. I really don't get it. Meanwhile, she's supposed to be this, America's sweetheart pop star. But nope, she's just treated like shit behind the scenes. The way I see Britney with these relationships that she has is like, she's just like one of those girls who's always dating guys who treat her like shit. You know what I mean? I'm sure you know someone in your life who's in the same position, or you've known someone who knows someone that's like that. That person deserves so much more, and you can see the worth in them and how great they are, but they always choose these guys who just don't give a shit about them. And I really do think that all Britney needed at this point in time was a friend to just hug her and tell her everything was going to be okay. That she was beautiful, that she was brilliant, that she was a great mother, and that she was going to succeed. But no one was there to do that for her, it seems. Meanwhile, Kevin was out in the media telling them that being a father was the best thing that ever happened to him in his life. But he had 2 kids with a woman that he dipped out on, and now he was having 2 more kids with another woman that he also was going to dip out on. In my opinion, Kevin Federline is the definition of the TLC song, No Scrubs. And if you don't know that song, please go look it up. At this point, Britney was told that Kevin was going to file for divorce, but it was recommended to her that Britney should file for divorce first so that it wouldn't humiliate her in the media. But it actually ended up doing the opposite, because when she filed for divorce, the media ended up saying that she was breaking up her perfect little family and she looked like the bad guy. So it was only 2 months after Britney gave birth to her second child that she would end up filing for divorce, and both of them would ask for full custody. Meanwhile, despite that, Kevin was now asking Britney to pay for all his legal bills, but Kevin was also kind of getting hounded by the media at this point because they were making fun of him for his failed music career, because people weren't really vibing with his music. So it was like they were both getting hate in certain ways. Britney mentioned that later in the month, she ended up attending the AMAs where she was going to present an award. And during this, Jimmy Kimmel ended up making fun of Kevin, where he ended up calling him a no-hit wonder. And he did this right before Britney was going to go on stage. And she said this really upset her because it was the father of her children and she did love this man. She loved Kevin just like she had loved Justin. But it really just seemed like these men were just using Britney to get more famous. That's all it was to them. They were just using her as a status symbol. I fucked Britney Spears. Britney saying, and I quote, "Looking back, I think both Justin and Kevin were very clever. They knew what they were doing and I played right into it," end quote. Now here's the thing. I think we all think because Britney had all this fame and money that she was some media-trained superstar that calculated her every move. But it seems like in reality, she was just a child star from a small town who never really got support from anyone other than when she was making money for them. And as I said in the beginning, I feel like Britney was living a real-life Truman Show life. Yes, she was talented, and yes, she was rich now. But at the end of the day, she was just a 20-year-old girl who woke up in the morning and wanted to get Starbucks like the rest of us. If there was any celebrity that I think was very down-to-earth in that way, that was like a quote-unquote real person, I really do think it's Britney Spears. Britney saying, and I quote, "I wasn't calculated, I was just stupid," end quote. And after what Justin and Kevin ended up doing to her, she no longer trusted people. But it would get worse from there, as we all know. This is where Paris Hilton and the downfall of Britney Spears would come in. Many scandalous photos and the nights partying and the flashing photos. But Britney says that the one person who was there for her during this time after Kevin and her got her divorce and she was in her lowest low again was Paris Hilton. And she says that Paris was super sweet to her during this time and that she helped her out so much during this time when she was so emotionally raw and experiencing so much heartbreak. And it turns out, unsurprisingly, that Paris is the one that convinced Britney to start going out and party. But think of it this way. Britney had gone through so much. She was basically home 24/7, just taking care of her kids for the most part. She'd spent the last couple of years pregnant and at home. She did work here and there, but it wasn't like she was out partying. It wasn't like she was hanging out with friends. She was dealing with her relationship, going downhill and deteriorating and taking care of her children. She'd been cooped up for all of this time and hadn't really had fun. So when you think of it as, if you had a friend who was a mother who hadn't gone out and just had some alone time for a long time or, some me time, mothers need that. People need that. You can't just be cooped up with your children 24/7. You need to be able to do adult things, have adult experiences, have time for yourself. And that's even better for your mental health than being cooped up all the time. And so it seems that Paris was that person that was finally like, you know what? I think what you need is to go out and have some you time. And when I think of it that way, it doesn't seem that wild to me. It doesn't seem wild to me that her friends, her closest friends, would tell her, you know, go get a babysitter and let's go out together. Again, it's actually good for people, especially, you know, Britney. Sitting at home all the time, moping, wasn't going to make her mental health better. Now, going out drinking also probably wouldn't have helped, but at least she was getting out of the house. But of course the media didn't see it that way. Britney was labeled as a slut, as a whore. She was, you know, a deadbeat mom that was going out drinking and getting drunk. She would be painted by the press as the worst mother in history for going out and having some drinks with friends. Now, if you remember at the beginning of the video, I mentioned that Britney was taking Adderall. I think I mentioned she was taking antidepressants, but she was specifically taking Adderall. And she admitted that during this point in her life, she was still taking them because they would make her feel less depressed. And she said that's the only thing that she did besides drinking alcohol and smoking cigarettes.
I've been around people and I've gotten the high off of it, and that is enough for me. I can't do that. I don't do that.
You talked about experimenting, partying. Cocaine?
No, I never.
They left the impression that at clubs that you tried cocaine.
I've experimented in partying, but never that. I could never do something like that. I mean, I definitely, in this industry, there's people that do that around you 24/7. So, you know, you just have to learn who you hang out with. And I mean, I've had amaretto sours, and if I'm gonna drink, and I love red wine right now. Red wine, it makes me like really mellow, and but as far as, I'm such a control freak, I would never be able to do something that makes me feel out of, I mean, drinking makes me feel that way sometimes, so I can't.
Which made this whole thing even worse, where people were so upset by her drinking and just going out and having fun with friends. She couldn't go out and have some fun with her friends. Meanwhile, there were all of these other celebrities who were going out, getting absolutely obliterated every single night, sleeping with all of these different people that were doing all of these crazy hard drugs, and it was okay for them to do it, but it wasn't okay for Britney to just go out and drink. The father of her children could go out and party and be this rapper guy. Her ex-boyfriend could go out and sleep with all these women and get drunk every night and party. But when it came to her trying to do that, or even just taking a foot into the door of doing that, she was the worst mother of history. The night the media would go crazy is when Britney, Lindsay Lohan, and Paris Hilton would be photographed together while Lynne watched Britney's 2 children. And that night, the 3 girls ended up going out, they went drinking, and Britney said they were just relaxing and being silly. They weren't doing anything wild that night. However, when Britney would end up getting home, Lynne would end up screaming at her, and they got into a big fight. Which in hindsight, if the children are safely being taken care of with a babysitter, which is the grandmother, it's not like Lynne had anything better to do because she's not working. Why was it such a bad thing then if Britney went out? It's not like the kids were just being left alone or with some stranger and she was being reckless and endangering her children at all. She was just going out to have some me time, which again would have been good for her. Like, just imagine yourself, if you're a parent or not, wanting to go out and have a night for yourself and then you're being shamed for it. That's what really gets me with Britney. She was always treated like she was some 14-year-old teenager that was sneaking out of the house to go drink and smoke, when really she was a full-grown adult who was being responsible and then, you know, going to have some fun. It's just so bizarre to me, the way that she was always treated. And keep in mind, she was working her ass off funding her entire family's lifestyles. So it's not like she was just some deadbeat mom who wasn't working and was just partying all the time and leaving her children with strangers and being bad. Like, it doesn't make sense. She was a millionaire. She should be able to go relax sometimes and party and have fun. But every time she would be punished for her actions. Lynne always treated Britney as if she was bad. And that fight seemed to be some kind of dark turning point in their relationship. Now we enter Kevin trying to get full custody of their children. And when you see the full picture of this, the fact that Britney had postpartum depression, she was just trying to have some me time with friends, while Kevin was doing the same, if not worse. And then you see that Kevin was trying to twist all of this to say that Britney was a bad mother who was just partying all the time and that she was crazy. So he wanted full custody of their kids, even though, again, he was doing the same thing she was. It's just jaw-dropping. Kevin would then take the kids from Britney and refuse to let her see them for weeks on end, which is just, it's just heartbreaking, this whole spiral. Finally, Britney had enough and she went to Kevin and begged him to let her see their kids, but he refused. And according to Britney, this was the breaking point where the paparazzi that night ended up cornering her. She decided to give them exactly what they wanted. a show. So she went into that hair salon, buzzed her hair off, and the true Britney Spears' crazy era begun. We talked a lot in part 1 how Britney shaving her head was a big fuck you to the media and her team because she was just so absolutely done with being famous. She just wanted to be a mother and a, normal girl. Again, I think this really goes back to child stars not having the wherewithal and the forethought about what will happen in the future when you get famous like this, especially to Britney's level of fame. And honestly, her cutting her hair off is the least that she could have done considering she was having her children ripped away from her now. And honestly, I'm sure a lot of people out there would do a lot worse if their children were ripped away from them like that than just shaving their heads off. Britney would end up saying the most powerful quote that I think she's ever said. Britney saying, and I quote, "Everyone thought it was hilarious. Look how crazy she is. Even my parents acted embarrassed of me, but nobody seemed to understand that I was simply out of my mind with grief. My children had been taken away from me. With my head shaved, everyone was scared of me. Even my mom. No one would talk to me anymore because I was too ugly. My long hair was a big part of what people liked. I knew that. I knew a lot of guys thought my long hair was hot. Shaving my head was a way to say to the world, fuck you. You want me to be pretty for you? Fuck you. You want me to be good for you? Fuck you. You want me to be your dream girl? Fuck you. I've been the good girl for so many years. I'd smiled politely as TV show hosts leered at my breasts, while American parents said I was destroying their children by wearing a crop top, while executives patted my hand condescendingly and second-guessed my career choices even though I'd sold millions of records while my family acted like I was evil. And I was tired of it." End quote. Good for you, Britney. And we also talked a lot in part 1 about the situation of Britney at the gas station. Now, according to Britney, that day, her cousin Allie was supposed to drive her to Kevin so that she could try to see her children. But someone ended up tipping off the paparazzi, and then what ended up happening at the gas station happened where Britney ended up attacking the guy's car with an umbrella. And if you watch part 1, you know my feelings about that. I honestly think the paparazzi deserved it. But when Allie tried to take Britney to see the children, she once again was denied access to them. And the paparazzi then hounded Britney once again after she was told that news, asking her questions such as, and I quote, how she felt not being able to see her children, end quote. Like, dude, how the hell do you think she felt being denied access to seeing her children? Like, again, why would you ask these questions other than to piss her off more and to upset her more? Obviously because they wanted to get pictures of her acting crazy. That winter, Britney would be told that if she went to rehab, she would be able to see her children again. When she ended up arriving at the facility, her father Jamie would be there and he would end up telling her that she was a disgrace. But rehab actually was a good thing for Britney. It ended up allowing her to start therapy and start, healing some of her inner problems that she was having. And when she got out, she ended up getting a good attorney and she ended up being awarded 50-50 custody. But despite Britney still not being in a good mental state, Kevin was not done fighting. He was not done ruining her even more. And her team also didn't care because they were now pressuring her to perform at the VMAs. To make matters worse, when Britney was at the VMAs, she ended up running into Justin backstage. This sent her into having a panic attack, and everything just went from bad to worse that night. This is a performance where she was so heavily scrutinized for, and it breaks my heart for her, considering she was a new mom, she was postpartum. It was just a mess with what everyone did to this poor woman. Not only did she run into her ex who had traumatized her, she then had to perform on stage. She hadn't slept the day before. She also wasn't back to her pre-baby body weight, which back then, it was such a huge thing that after you had a baby, you had to snap back right away, which is ridiculous. And everyone wanted her to be like super skinny thin, even though she just had 2 babies back to back. So all of this was happening around her. And meanwhile, Justin was there living his best life, like flipping his hair, partying, just not giving a shit. Then Sarah Silverman, who I will say I've never found this woman funny, and when I heard this, it made me actually hate her, to be honest. Sarah Silverman, who is a comedian, ended up getting on stage, and this is what she would end up saying.
25 years old, and she's already accomplished everything she's going to accomplish in her life. It's mind-blowing, and she's so grown up. She's a mother, it's crazy. It's weird to think that just a few years ago on this very show, she was this like sweet, innocent little girl in slutty clothes riding around with a python. Have you seen Britney's kids? Oh my God, they are the most adorable mistakes you will ever see. They are so cute. They're as cute as the hairless vagina they came out of. I'm serious, they're this cute, you guys.
I don't have words for it. But later that night, the media would continue to drag Britney through the mud.
Music Awards live from Las Vegas. Miss Spears opening the show with her new single, the unfortunately titled Gimme More. As Spears dipped her toe back into the entertainment pond, you could figuratively feel it freezing over beneath her. It was that skimpy, glittery bikini. Gimme more clothing. Well, she was wearing pants. Ms. Spears was barely backstage, reportedly crying, when the host, Sarah Silverman, let loose. To overstate these sorry notices that Ms. Spears received, the AP said she looked bleary and unprepared, which, is me most nights. USA Today called it truly forgettable. The always unkind New York Post jiggled like Jell-O, and good old TMZ.com headlined with R.I.P. Britney's career 1998-2007. But
jiggled like Jell-O. In my opinion, I don't think calling someone's children mistakes is a joke. Considering they weren't mistakes, she had planned them in a loving marriage that she had with Kevin, which she thought was a loving marriage at the time. I honestly think it was so uncalled for. And then for the media to go on and call her fat, it's just ridiculous. The fact that Britney went on stage and performed that night despite not wanting to do it, despite still not being in a good place mentally to do it, despite not having slept, despite, going through everything she was going through. She got out of rehab. She was trying to mend herself, get her kids back, and then her team makes her go on stage and do that. Eventually, Britney's management team would end up quitting, and then a security guard would go on and testify in court that Britney was doing drugs. However, it was said he was not cross-examined, and Britney swears she was not doing drugs. A court-appointed parenting coach would go on to say that Britney loved her children, that they were bonded together, and that there was no signs of abuse in the home. But guess what made the headlines? It definitely wasn't the latter. January of 2008, one of Britney's former security guards that now worked for Kevin ended up coming over to her house to pick up her children and take them back to Kevin's house. This is when the infamous situation happened where Britney would lock herself in the bathroom with Jaden. And this is because Britney didn't know if she was going to see her kids again, ever again, considering the custody battles and considering how Kevin had taken the children at times and, refused to let her see them. Britney saying, and I quote, "A friend was there and came to the bathroom door and told me the security guard would wait. I held Jaden and cried so hard, but no one was giving me extra time." End quote. And as we all know, a SWAT team would show up, they would take Jaden, and then they would end up strapping Britney to a gurney, which the paparazzi would photograph, and they would haul her off to a hospital. But she would end up being released before the 72-hour hold was up, because again, Britney was not actually crazy. But after this situation happened, her custody would end up being reduced. No one had her back or her side, not even her family. Another man that she had trusted ripped her life away from her once again. Britney does admit that after all of this ended up happening, where she was taken to this hospital, where the kids were stripped away from her again, where she didn't have her custody, she began to spiral. She admits that she was still using Adderall at this time and that she was, and I quote, hell on wheels, end quote, at this point, because she honestly just didn't care anymore, which honestly, I don't blame her. I feel like a lot of us would be in that same situation. Her entire world had been ripped away from her. Again, it was one thing after another. I don't blame her. I'm gonna be honest, I don't blame her for acting the way that she did. Also, random side note at this time, we all know that at this time, when Jamie Lynn was 16 years old, Britney ended up finding out about her sister's pregnancy on a tabloid magazine. But what I didn't know was that at the same time, Jamie Lynn was actually trying to file for emancipation from their parents, accusing their parents of taking away her cell phones, so she had to buy burner phones to text people on, which... that's the least of her worries. Meanwhile, Britney's going through all of this. At this point in time, Britney ended up seeing a photographer named Adnan Galib, and she essentially said that she started dating him because he was chivalrous and kept her safe from the paparazzi because he was, kind of one of them. Again, she didn't care anymore at this point, so much so that at one point they were being chased by paparazzi in their car, and Britney ended up doing a 360 and skidding and almost went off a cliff. But by some grace of God, they did not go over, but Britney said it gave her a rush. And we all know at this time, Britney was partying all the time and she was out of control according to the media and her family. But she said Adnan also encouraged her to be wild too. He was another one of these bad influences. But Britney, along with I think the rest of the world almost at this point, agrees that what happened next was not warranted by her actions. She was extremely angry. She was depressed. She was sad. She had no proper mental health help or any support around her from, decent people it seemed, let alone her family just didn't care. So I'm not shocked that she lashed out the way that she did. But this is where the conservatorship would enter the chat. And we now have new details about what happened that day. Britney said that her mother Lynne ended up calling her saying, and I quote, "Britney, we feel like something's going on. We hear that the cops are after you. Let's go to the beach house," end quote. In the days prior, Britney had actually had a sleepover with her cousin Allie, 2 friends, and her mother Lynne. So she had just spent the last couple days with her family. So what did she do whether the cops were after her? So Britney ended up driving over to the beach house, and her boyfriend Adnan ended up meeting her there, but they both clearly noticed that something was off. Lynne was acting suspicious, and Adnan picked up on this too. And then out of nowhere, like in a movie, helicopters started circling the area, and Britney was in shock, asking if this was a joke or not. Then, to make this even more like a movie scene, a SWAT team ended up appearing and detaining Britney, and she was whisked off to a hospital again. As we all know, this was all orchestrated by Britney's father, Jamie Spears. But what we didn't know were the details. According to Britney, Jamie had struck up a relationship with her former business manager, Lou Taylor, who was extremely influential when calling the shots right before the conservatorship took place. Lou had taken Britney's fame in her name and started her own company called TriStar Sports and Entertainment Group. And conveniently, Jamie ended up somehow owing Lou about $40,000, which we all know that this man did not have that money to pay her back. His entire life had been a non-stop history of him starting up businesses and those businesses failing and then him going into bankruptcy. So I'm not shocked that he owed thousands of dollars to someone, but that did give him a motive to need more money. So let's chat about conservatorships for a moment. A conservatorship is supposed to be, for example, for someone that has, say, Alzheimer's, someone who can no longer make decisions for themselves, who doesn't have the mental capacity, who's no longer all mentally there to, or say someone who's in a coma, who again can't be alert and have the mental capacity to make decisions for themselves, whether that be medically or financially. But Britney Spears was a fully functional millionaire who made millions of dollars a year. She paid her bills, she took flights to travel, she went on talk shows, she went on award shows and handed out awards, she danced in arenas for thousands and thousands of people. There was absolutely no reason for someone like Britney Spears to have their entire freedom taken away from them. But then we have the root to all evil: money. We all know that Britney was funding the lifestyles of her entire family. And according to Britney, her father was actually taking a bigger salary than she was even getting paid. But he was also giving tens of millions of dollars away to other people as well. Just an absolute scum of the earth. Jamie would end up taking out a conservatorship of the person and of the state. Meaning not only was Jamie about to take control of not only all of Britney's money, but also every aspect of Britney's life. He could control what she ate, when she ate it, what she did, where she went, where she lived. In my opinion, it's a narcissist's dream. Britney said when the conservatorship was about to begin, she begged the court to let anyone else, some random stranger off the street, be in control of her life. Anyone besides her father. But she was made out to be crazy and demented, and she was told that she wasn't even allowed to choose her own lawyer, that it had to be a court-appointed lawyer, which we would learn is illegal and a lie, and Jamie would end up being awarded all the power. The man that she had begged her mother to divorce, who would make Britney cry as a child, who was cold and mean and harsh to her, a man who she hardly had a close relationship at all with her entire upbringing. I'm still honestly in shock that this happened. I am absolutely in shock. And I am angry that more hasn't been done to give Britney any justice. Yeah, I'm shocked that the courts of California haven't gotten any backlash from this. It is just absolutely disgusting that this ever happened to her. She was literally living an episode of Black Mirror, like a literal worst nightmare. And you wonder why her conservatorship went on for so long, why it went on for 13 years. It was money, 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 money. That was the only reason. Because Britney was worth more to these people locked up in a room because it was their money now, not hers. And remember, she didn't want to work anymore. She didn't want to work anymore at this point. She just wanted to be a mother and live her life and enjoy her money. But that would mean that she would no longer be making money for these people, and all of these people would either have to live off their savings or they would have to get jobs too. And they didn't want that. A lawyer named Andrew Wallet, which I think is kind of ironic, would end up being paid $426,000 a year to keep Britney away from her own money. That was his job, to just keep her away from her own money. He was getting paid almost $500,000 a year. She would also be forced to pay around $500,000 to a court-appointed lawyer who she had no say in at the time, or who she thought she had no say in at the time because she was being lied to. So at this point, we have Lou Taylor and Jamie Spears taking control of Britney's entire life and anatomy. We also have Lynne here writing a book about her daughter's struggles, profiting over her daughter's downfall and going on talk shows talking shit about her daughter instead of being there for her daughter and comforting her while she's going through this incredibly traumatic and hard time in her life. It's so twisted. Like, what kind of mother does that? I also learned that Lynne was actually friends with the governor of Louisiana at the time. And if Lynne actually cared about her daughter, she could have helped get her daughter out of that conservatorship, but she didn't want to. You know why? Money. So no, I don't blame Britney for being pissed off at her family at all at the end of this, and you're gonna learn more that's gonna make you even madder. On top of all of that, meanwhile, Jamie Lynn is being praised as being a teen mom who is still with the baby daddy. Now let's talk about just how much this conservatorship doesn't make sense. As I said, the entire reason for this thing was Britney's money. And as I said, the reason a conservator is supposed to be put in place and someone's supposed to be in a conservatorship is because they can't make their own decisions, they can't function anymore, you know, they don't have the mental capacity to make these decisions. But as soon as Britney was put into this conservatorship, she was forced to work full-time again. Which, how does that make sense if she's not even smart enough, apparently, or capable enough to make a decision on what she eats, or if she wants to buy Starbucks, or if she wants to buy a house here, or if she wants to go drive her car, or if she wants to go use her cell phone and text someone, or if she wants to watch a certain show. She apparently can't do any of those decisions, but she can go out and work her ass off and make millions of dollars for these people. And let me tell you, Britney worked. She immediately was forced to shoot an episode for How I Met Your Mother, and then she was forced to go on a world tour. Again, Britney didn't want to work anymore. She didn't want to do any of this, but she was forced to. It's giving kind of like slavery, in my opinion, forcing someone to work and then them not even getting to see the money from it or like get control of any of that. It's just, I don't know what the line of that is, but it seems to be encroaching on it. And considering like she was not in the mental headspace to do any of this, and then she was just continuously forced to do more and more and more and more, it just made things worse. So in every inhumane way possible, this woman's rights were completely stripped from her. Her right to say no was erased, and she was forced to work day after day. She was a prisoner in her own home. She was a prisoner in her own body, in her own life. It's so fucked up. Britney would point out that she knew celebrities who would do things like hardcore drugs, as I mentioned earlier, who got into fistfights, who destroyed property, who were menaces essentially. And they weren't in conservatorships. They didn't have any repercussions. Meanwhile, Britney said that she was very protective of her money. She said she would save every receipt from things she bought to use for tax season.
It's really weird because I don't think right now I'm not like how I used to be. I mean, I used to roll quarters for freaking clothes, but I mean, I'm not like that. I mean, sometimes I splurge. My assistant, Felicia, she helps me out on that. She was like, if you want it, you just get it. I'm like, okay, I'll get it. But there is something about me, like if there's a sweater for $1,000, I can't buy that. Like, there's something in me that being raised, you know, a certain way, I can't, you know, do that.
And as we've seen, she seemed to be a very capable person, yet according to the state of California, she wasn't a capable person. Jamie would end up moving into Britney's home immediately. He would shove aside that bowl of receipts that meant so much to how capable she really was. And he would say to her, and I quote, "I just want to let you know, I call the shots now. You sit right there in that chair and I'll tell you what goes on. I'm Britney Spears now." End quote. When I tell you I shuddered, I got chills hearing her say that he told her that. It's what we've all suspected this entire time. This man is so evil. I can imagine a father saying something along the lines of that, not even to that severity, to say a rebellious teenage daughter. But a 20-year-old who's making millions of dollars, who has 2 children, I'm just flabbergasted that this was her existence. I can't imagine. I'd be throwing shit and trying to bust out the window. Like Britney was living a real life horror movie. Like that is horrifying. That is an evil villain. And no one knew. And those who didn't care. We also talked a lot already in part 1 and in this video about the restrictions that Britney was placed under. Well, she revealed even more. When Britney would want to go over to someone's home, her father would make the security team sweep this person's house and look for any drugs, alcohol, even Tylenol wasn't allowed in the house. And if she wanted to date someone, they had to go through a background check, sign an NDA, and submit a blood test. Before the first date that Britney would have with this person, they would end up being told Britney's entire medical and sexual history. So you can imagine that it would be kind of hard to date someone when all of those steps had to take place. And it would also be extremely humiliating. Eventually, Britney's cell phone would also be taken away from her, and she'd actually be snuck burner phones. And when she did try to run away, she would be caught and brought back. Her assistant, Felicia, who she really cared about, would be fired and be told that Britney didn't want her to work for for her anymore, which is a flat out lie. It was so bad that her team would be told to track every bowel movement that Britney had while at the studio. Jamie constantly told Britney that she was fat, that she couldn't eat dessert, and then he would force her to work out. It was so bad that Jamie would force Britney to go on diets, and she would beg people to sneak her food. She said for 2 years, she ate nothing but chicken and canned vegetables. 2 years. Britney saying, and I quote, "It was always incredible to me that so many people felt so comfortable talking about my body. It had started when I was young. Whether it was strangers in the media or my own family, people seemed to experience my body as public property, something they could police, control, or use as a weapon. My body was strong enough to carry 2 children and agile enough to execute every choreographed move perfectly on stage. And yet here I was, having every calorie recorded so people could continue to get rich off my body." End quote. I can't imagine the mental toll and food trauma that would cause someone, having that happen to them. Just another layer of trauma to give her. And all the while she was starving and working her ass off and not being allowed to do anything other than those 2 things, her family was off eating at fancy restaurants, sipping wine on the beach, vacationing at luxury beach houses, all on Britney's dime. The level of fucked up just never stops in this. And after everything Britney had been through, she was utterly defeated at this point, and she kind of just gave herself away to just float along with it all. They could do whatever to her whenever. They could even kill her if they wanted, and she would not be able to stop them. And she said she basically at this point just started playing along, kind of like a kidnapping victim getting brainwashed by their captor. She thought that if she acted good the way that they wanted her to, that they would let her go. But they weren't going to, and it was just gonna get worse. They would end up feeding Britney prepackaged medications. They would also put her phone on parental locks so that she can only do certain things on it. Again, a 20-year-old woman with parental locks on her phone. Britney saying, and I quote, "I would go to sleep early and then I would wake up and do what they told me again and again and again. It was like Groundhog Day. I did that for 13 years. End quote. And as we spoke in part 1, Britney's children were used to control her. If she played by the rules, she would be able to see them. If she didn't, or she mentioned the word no, they would threaten to not allow her to see her children. It's honestly the most demented abuse in any way possible, in my opinion. And of course, Britney was still supporting Kevin at this point too. It wasn't just her own close family. She was still paying for her ex-husband's lifestyle. She paid his legal bills, she paid him child support, and then thousands of dollars on top of that. And I'm sure going through that would brainwash you into thinking that something really was wrong with you. If every single person in your life was looking at you and telling you that you were unfit and that you were crazy and that you couldn't even decide what you could eat for breakfast, I'm sure that would brainwash you into start thinking that something probably was wrong with you and that maybe you couldn't make these decisions. And maybe you are truly crazy. But Britney said in the back of her mind, as she was touring Australia, doing segments for Ellen, winning 20+ awards in 2008 and more, she was wondering if she was truly so incompetent, how the hell was she working her ass off? It just didn't make sense, and it doesn't till this day. But what again did make sense was money. Britney's circus tour grossed $130 million. $130 million that Britney pretty much never saw. Lou Taylor's company ended up getting 5% of that, meaning Lou Taylor alone made around $6.5 million off of Britney. Jamie was also paying himself $16,000 a month, but anything Britney wanted to buy with her own money had to go through her father. Meanwhile, Britney was only getting paid $8,000 a month, which in today's day and age, that would even be nice. I would love to make $8,000 a month, but considering she was a multi-millionaire, so she was getting paid half of what her father was being paid, even though she was doing all of the work, and then she couldn't even use that money. Britney said that one time she wanted to take her dancers out to a dinner and they all spent about $1,000. So she wanted to pay this $1,000 check, which considering they probably went to a nice restaurant, she was paying for multiple people, $1,000 isn't a crazy amount of money for a multimillionaire. However, when Britney went to pay the check, her card declined because there wasn't enough money in her allowance account. So a multimillionaire couldn't even pay a $1,000 check for dinner for her friends. So just think how degrading and how humiliating that would feel. Considering you just did a tour that made $130 million and you can't even pay a $1,000 check. That's why, in my opinion, this kind of seems like modern day slavery. The fact that she made $130 million, but she couldn't even use any of that money. It wasn't hers to use, even though she was the one working for it. Britney would eventually be able to date someone, and this is when she would start dating an agent by the name of Jason Trawick. This man was 10 years older than Britney, and during their 3-year relationship, he would actually be signed as a co-conservator, who would later go on to say, and I quote, "Listen, did she need a conservatorship when I was there? Yes. I'll be the first to say it. I think she needed some guidance." End quote. Jason going on to say that Britney didn't know the cost of anything, and she spent a lot of money, and she needed therapy, and it forced her to stop seeing certain individuals that were not good influences. Now, I wonder if he was not forced to sign an NDA and he wasn't a co-conservator, probably most likely meaning he was making money off of her, would he still say the same thing? Also, does that sound like he's talking about a 20 to 30-year-old woman? In my opinion, no. It sounds like he's talking about a child. And it's ridiculous. And I just say, F that guy. Britney would eventually say that she broke up with Jason because she fell out of love with him and her kids were more important to her. But as I said, there are so many people close to her that would go and speak to the media and say that she deserved to be in this conservatorship and that she was crazy. It's ridiculous. And honestly, I think that's because he was on the payroll. I think that's the only reason why. When the years would pass and Britney would eventually be offered to do a Vegas tour, she went along with this because she essentially said she didn't have anything else to do. She was just locked up all the other times. At least this would allow her to, go out and do something. It's not like her life was fulfilling. So it seemed like doing things like being on the X Factor and doing the Vegas shows were just something to pass the time. But Britney said it eventually turned into something more positive to her, which was nice to hear through all of this trauma and horribleness that she had some light in her life. She said that doing the Vegas show and seeing her fans gave her so much confidence and energy. She would eventually go on to teach dance classes to children, which was also something else that was very fulfilling to her. Her kids were growing up, and eventually she would go on to date a TV producer named Charlie Ebersole. Charlie really seemed to be into fitness and into health, and he eventually would introduce Britney to these supplements that were good for your body. And she said when she started taking these supplements, it made her feel more energized, because remember, she was on these very strict diets. But of course, Jamie didn't like this one bit, that Britney was doing something behind his back, so to speak, and he was very obsessive about regimenting everything that went into her body and came out of her body. So Jamie then forced her to stop taking these supplements and forced her to go to rehab, saying that she was an addict now, even though apparently these were over-the-counter supplements, probably just some kind of pre-workout or something. I don't know what it was because she never actually said what it was, but it was some kind of health supplement, so it couldn't have been that crazy in my opinion. And in my opinion, he just sent her to rehab because he wanted to punish her for disobeying him. And when she went to rehab, she wasn't allowed to now see her kids for an entire month again. Britney said during this stay, she didn't feel safe at this rehab because there were actual serious addicts there who were addicted to heroin and crack. And they were there detoxing and recovering, which is not an easy thing to do. And then you have Britney Spears that's in rehab for taking an herbal supplement. And apparently throughout this entire time, Jamie Lynn was just always complaining about anything she could. Nothing was ever good enough for her. The turning point for Britney would come in 2014 when she was teaching one of these dance classes for kids that she would teach. And she ended up turning and bonking this little girl in the head. Britney said that she was so concerned for this child. Meanwhile, this little girl was completely fine. She just accidentally hit her with her arm. It wasn't like she flung her across the room or something or knocked her down. But Britney realized in this moment that she had more care for this little girl and her well-being than her entire family and team had for her. And this gave Britney the confidence and realization that her situation that she was in wasn't safe and that it wasn't appropriate. So this is the very first time that Britney would end up petitioning the conservatorship, telling the court about her father's alcoholism and his erratic behavior. And she begged the judge to drug test her father, but they refused to. The judge did nothing. In 2016, Britney said she mentioned her conservatorship on a talk show, but that segment of the show conveniently wasn't included on air, which we all know media is highly edited and censored. And I think this is a really good example of it. Still in 2016, she was still attempting to get help from anyone out there who was gonna listen, and they took her voice away from her. I can't imagine how defeated I would feel if that happened. Britney and Charlie would eventually end up breaking up after what she called a stupid fight, and they would just kind of end up not talking to each other again. She would end up working on another album at this point in time. She went to the VMAs for the first time in years. And this is where we get into the very highly analyzed relationship of Britney and Sam Asghari. Their relationship has so many rumors, so many conspiracies. And I went down the rabbit hole about a year ago on their relationship and everything that was happening at that point in time. And if you want me to talk about it in another video, maybe I will, but what does Britney have to say about it? Well, Britney said that she first met Sam on the set of her music video for Slumber Party, saying that the first time that she saw him, she knew she was going to want him in her life immediately. Britney says she was instantly smitten and their chemistry was, as she put it, insane. Much like in Britney's earlier relationships, she said that they couldn't keep their hands off of each other and that he called her his lioness. And Britney said that she felt her spark returning when she met Sam. But of course, things couldn't just be good. The tabloids immediately started saying that Sam was going to cheat on Britney or had been cheating on Britney, even though they'd only only been dating for about 2 weeks. And Jamie ended up sending Britney back to rehab after he found that she was sneaking these energy supplements again. So he made her go to AA this time, which makes 0 sense because she wasn't abusing alcohol. She wasn't allowed to drink this whole time. However, she says that this ended up being a good thing because when she'd go to these AA meetings, which she was strictly scheduled to go to like almost every single day she had to go, she said that hearing the stories of the other women there was actually very inspiring to her, and it really brought a human connection to her life that she didn't have. And at this point, Britney said that she was going to these AA meetings for like weeks and weeks and weeks, and then at one point she wanted to skip just one of the meetings. She asked her dad if she could skip one of the meetings so that she could stay home that night and have a popcorn movie night with her sons. But when she asked Jamie, he told her no. And when she looked at her mother to stand up for her, because she wasn't trying to go out and party or something, she literally wanted to just spend some time with her children. And she looked to her mother for help, and her mother Lynne just turned away and didn't say a word. Britney sang, and I quote, "At that moment, I started to feel like I was in a cult and my father was the cult leader. They were treating me like I was beholden to him," end quote. Which is just absolutely so terrifying. As I said, her life was a nightmare, a literal nightmare. It was around this time when Britney finally started to realize that no matter how quote unquote good she wasn't ever going to be free. And at another point around this time, a girl that was doing Britney's hair ended up mentioning to Britney that her schedule was actually like really crazy, that her schedule was like way too strict, and that she needed to have more time to have fun and be creative, because as an artist, you need time to relax and like, you know, use your brain and learn new things and just, you know, go out there and create. But when Jamie ended up finding out about this conversation happening, that girl was never seen from again. But those words that that woman ended up telling Britney really sunk into her. And all of those instances where Britney was getting these human connections with people, and she was hearing that what she was feeling inside was true, that something was wrong in this situation and that she wasn't crazy, it really started to build up Britney's confidence and give her the strength to fight for herself. And she started to dream about being free. She would end up starting to look at women like Reese Witherspoon, who could be both sweet but powerful, and it started giving her confidence into who she was. So Britney started to become more assertive, which was Jamie and Lou's worst nightmare. Britney and Sam even started to talk about having a baby together. However, Jamie had forced Britney to wear an IUD this entire time, and he refused to let her get it removed. We also then got confirmation about black box security, which is another huge conspiracy. Britney would end up finding out that her father and Lou were commingling with them, secretly reading every text she sent, including text messages with her lawyer and her boyfriend. And Britney confirmed in her book that Jamie had bugged her house. Another breaking point for Britney came when she had been working for months on months and months and months and didn't get a break. And she usually got, a allotted amount of time to go on vacation with her children and spend time with her children every year. And when she went to go ask about getting that time with her children, her team ended up telling her that she wasn't actually going to get that time and she had to do another tour and work again. So she wasn't going to get her break. And they told her that if she refused to work, they would take her back to court again. She said it was like being told that the weekend would never come. So at this point, Britney was kind of finding strength inside of herself. And they ended up trying to force Britney to go on stage and announce how excited she was about this new Vegas tour. But instead, she appeared on stage and then walked right off stage. And it was a very iconic moment. So I'll play that for you now.
Ladies and gentlemen, Britney Spears! So a couple doors down from her last residency at Planet Hollywood that ended on New Year's Eve this past year, but Britney said nothing at this event. This is all she did.
Confused. Okay.
So she came out of that stage.
Yeah. She looked lost too when she was up there. She's like, what do I do? And I just stand here?
This is the guy that was hosting the live stream. He doesn't have a mic, so they just have this little interaction. You can't hear what they're saying. Looks like, hey, I like your dress, I like your hat. Then she waves by.
Didn't he have the mic earlier and he said Britney Spears, didn't he?
Yeah, and then he's gonna have the mic. Next shot of him, he has a mic again. So yeah, she just signed a few autographs. Okay. And then here she goes to get in her car and drive off. And people were confused. They're like, the fans that were there, the fans that were watching were like, that's it. We've been waiting for this live stream for.
And she ended up walking off stage without saying a word because she was so furious, because they had just told her that she wasn't allowed to go on vacation. She wasn't allowed to take even a week break and spend time with her children. She just had to work nonstop. And she was furious, and she was just tired and done with it at this point. But her decision to stand up for herself made her family lash out even stronger. That Christmas, Jamie told her that her children didn't want to see her for Christmas, and he took them to Louisiana. During a dance rehearsal around this time, Britney was having fun, she said. She was learning new dance moves. She thought they were really cool. But this one dancer did this move that she thought was too hard for her to do because she was getting older. She wasn't, 19 anymore. When she said that she didn't think she wanted to do this one specific dance move, her father's team immediately turned it into, Britney's impossible to work with. Britney's insufferable during rehearsals. The next day in therapy, Britney's therapist would end up telling her that they ended up finding energy supplements in her purse. And again, Britney would end up being punished by having a psych evaluation done by her father, and her father would end up telling her that she failed it miserably and that there was something severely mentally wrong with her. So she was again thrown, this time though, in a luxury rehab facility over the Christmas holidays, where she was in a program that was specifically catered for her, where she would be isolated from anyone else there. So essentially she was sent into like a segregation area, and she was having to pay $60,000 a month for this out of her own pocket. And Jamie said that if Britney refused to go, he would take her to court and humiliate her again. Jamie saying, and I quote, "I will make you look like a fucking idiot, and trust me, you will not win," end quote. And guess what they did to Britney's image over the decades? They made her look crazy, just like Jamie just said. They made Britney look crazy every single chance they got. So could they still be doing that till this very day? It makes me wonder. So Britney was once again locked up against her will for months. And she said one of the worst things was watching all of these people come in, the doctors, the nurses, walking in and being able to leave on their own free will. This is also when Britney would be taken off Prozac and force-fed lithium, the same drug her grandmother had been forced to take. And it severely altered the way that Britney's brain was working. It is a very dangerous drug. Her concept of time was now gone. She felt slow. She felt lethargic. Keep in mind, lithium is used to treat bipolar disorder and schizophrenia disorder. And it said that lithium is only used to treat these things after other antipsychotics have failed. And it seems like this was a drug that she did not need, but she was still being given. At one point, Britney said she begged her mother and her sister to help get her out of there, but they both turned her down, telling her that she just needed to stop fighting. But at some time during her stay there, the Free Britney movement would start. A nurse at this rehab center ended up showing Britney a video online of people speaking on talk shows of how they suspected that Britney was being held hostage against her will at a facility. And I'm sure that gave her so much hope after over a decade of her trying to beg for help, knowing that even if her family didn't care about her, her fans were out there and they cared about her. There was someone out there that did care. And it honestly basically confirmed that she was not crazy, that there was something wrong here. Britney saying, and I quote, "If you stood up for me when I couldn't stand up for myself, from the bottom of my heart, thank you," end quote. When Britney got out, Jamie Lynn, and her two daughters ended up going over to Britney's house to visit her. She was still on lithium at this point, and she felt in her gut like her family was trying to kill her. They showed up acting like they hadn't just locked her up and drugged her for months at a time against her will. Another big wake-up call came for Britney when Jamie ended up getting in a fight with her son, Sean. When Sean tried to defuse the situation and go into a bedroom, Jamie broke down the door, grabbed him, and shook him. Kevin ended up filing a police report about this, and Jamie was not allowed to see his grandson again. Now we have the question of Britney's Instagram, which I fully don't believe we have all the answers for. I went and looked back, and Britney actually started posting on her Instagram, if it was her posting, when she was still in the conservatorship. And Britney said in her book that she had started posting on Instagram to try to show people that she was a real person. And she said she did this by modeling clothes on Instagram and doing little dance videos. But one thing that Britney said that really stood out to me was when she said, and I quote, "The mystery to who the real me is to my advantage, because nobody knows," end quote. What does that mean? But then 2020 hit and Britney was once again isolated. And it wouldn't be until about a year later, on the night of June 22nd of 2021, when Britney would finally muster up the courage to call 911 and report her father for conservatorship abuse. Around this time, Jamie Lynn was now coming out with her book, but she couldn't say anything, which answers the big question to why everyone was like, why isn't Britney saying anything? Jamie Lynn saying all these things. She literally couldn't because she was still being controlled. Around this time, documentaries started coming out talking about Britney and her situation, but she also couldn't speak on that. But what really sucked was a lot of people that were really close to Britney, as I said, started supporting the conservatorship and basically saying that she was crazy. But finally, Britney got her day in court, and that's where we get that recorded video of Britney speaking that I played in part 1. And it was very moving to hear her voice finally say what she wanted to say. And it's really what solidified to me that she was in fact not crazy. There was not an ounce of crazy in that voice. She was very well spoken. She was very articulate. And she said Sam was with her when she she was on that phone call. After over a decade, Britney finally found out that she was actually legally allowed to choose her own lawyer, which is insane that it took that long for her to find out because everyone was telling her the opposite, which I don't know how they weren't charged with something for that. But she would end up hiring Matthew Rosengard, who actually also worked for people like Steven Spielberg and Keanu Reeves. And from there, Jamie would finally be removed as a conservator, and from there, Britney was quote unquote free. Now, her book does kind of address some of these conspiracies and questions that her fans have, but not all of them. And honestly, I still have a lot of questions. One of these being Sam Asghari and her wedding. There's a lot of questions I have about her social media because there definitely are a large sum of videos that, in my opinion, look photoshopped, that look like green screens, that look like AI. So let me know if you want me to do a part 3 talking about that stuff still. I also think it'd be interesting to do another part where we talk about all of these interviews that her family and friends and acquaintances did. I don't know, maybe we're all crazy now and we're the ones making things up, or maybe we're still fighting for Britney. But in her book, Britney simply says that her wedding was beautiful and basically that she celebrated her freedom and getting the choice to marry whoever she wanted. When it comes to her Instagram, Britney simply says that after decades of people deciding how she should dress and how she should be photographed, she says it liberates her to take these naked photos and post them on her Instagram and decide what angle she wants to take and what she wants to wear and do. And she's basically getting to do it on her own free will, according to her. She also addressed posting about being pregnant again and losing her baby, saying that she regrets posting about that stuff and says that she should have waited to announce it online, but I guess she was very excited. But she says that freedom to her is being silly and goofy on social media. So back to my original question. Is Britney Spears crazy? It's my opinion that Britney is still a very articulate, well-spoken woman who had a lot of bad shit happen to her. And I don't think she was crazy, but her book still left me with a lot of questions. It made me wonder if we are now the crazy ones, to think that there's still something sketchy going on. It jumped from Britney being crazy to her fans being crazy. Are we actually really crazy and she is just a free woman living her life, learning to relive life? But what I want to know is what you all think. Again, let me know down below if you want me to do another part and what that part should be and how you feel about this entire situation. I am just really interested in the nitty-gritty details, and I think we did get a lot more details with Britney's book. And I definitely recommend you go out and read it yourself. Hearing her own words and reading her own words are very moving. There are details that I didn't include in here because I do think it's different reading them for yourself than me just telling you about some of these details and just the way that she worded things. But for the most part, I think we learned a bunch of crazy new things. And the fact that Justin forced her to have an at-home abortion that was very, very reckless and dangerous of him to do. And just more details on her conservatorship. The fact that it was barely anything that led to it. And it's just, I don't know. This whole entire situation is just wild to me. And I really do feel like there should be people charged in this that have not been charged. But again, let me know how you all feel. With that, I hope you all stay safe out there, lock your windows and doors, and I hope for Britney's sake that she is free out there and that she is living her best damn life that she can after everything that happened to her. Yeah, I'll see you all in the next video.